If you're studying for your Unit 6 test, the very first learning target that we talked about was solving equations with variables on both sides. Sometimes that'll mean combining like terms, other times you'll need to use the distributive property. Occasionally you'll need to do both of those things, but you're always going to have a letter only on one side of the equal sign. And these first three examples you're going to have to solve using the distributive property. If you don't remember what that is, it's when you take the number right outside of the parentheses, so that number that I'm highlighting in each of these examples, and you multiply by everything on the inside of the parentheses. So in our first example, it doesn't look like there's anything there, we just have that negative sign. But remember that there's an invisible 1 in there, and that you're actually distributing -1. So we're going to take that -1 and just multiply it by everything inside of the parentheses. So -1 times 2 is going to be -2, and -1 times 7y is going to be -7y. And that's still going to be equal to -51. From there, we don't want a variable and a constant on the same side of the equation, so we need to get rid of one of them. Since we only have the variable on that one side, we're going to get rid of the -2. The opposite of -2 is +2, so that's what we're going to add down below. And whatever we do to one side of the equation, we also must do to the other. So the -2 and +2 will cancel out, and we're left with just 7y. And then -51 plus 2 will give us -49. And we're almost done, but not quite, because we don't want to know what -7y is, we want to know what 1y is. So we need to divide by our coefficient. Our coefficient is that number that's attached to our letter, so -7 is what we're going to divide by. And that will cancel out on the left-hand side, and we're left with just y. And -49 divided by -7 is +7, and that's our answer. For the next example, it's the same process. We see a fraction sometimes and we get a little frazzled, we don't quite know what to do. But we're going to follow the same steps. We're still going to distribute. So we'll do 1/3 times 9f and 1/3 times 12. 1/3 times 9 is going to give us 3. Remember to drop down that f, don't just let it disappear or you're going to mess up your answer. And 1/3 times 12 is going to be +4. And it's still equal to 25. Once again, we have a variable and a constant on the same side, so we need to get rid of one of them. So we're going to subtract the 4, because +4 and -4 cancel out, you get 0, and you're left with 3f. And then 25 minus 4 is going to give us 21. And our last step again is just to divide by that coefficient. So we're going to divide by 3 on both sides. And we're left with f is equal to 7. Our third example, once again, almost exactly the same. You might get a little bit confused just because the distributed number is actually on the right-hand side of the parentheses, but it's still attached to the parentheses, so you know that's the number you should be multiplying. And you're going to do that to both of the numbers on the inside. So 8.2 times 0.5 will give you 4.1. And remember that should be a v because there's a v here. And then 10.5 times 0.5 is going to be 5.25. And then it's still equal to 99.55. And then we follow the same steps. We don't want a variable and a constant on the same side, so we're going to get rid of that 5.25. And what we do to one side, we have to also do to the other. It'll cancel out. And 99.55 minus 5.25 is going to give us 94.3. It's equal to 4.1v. And then you divide by your coefficient. So your coefficient is 4.1. And when you divide those out, you'll get 23 is equal to v. And that's your answer. So that's how we solve using the distributive property. In our next couple of examples, you're going to need a little bit more than just the distributive property. If you look at the first one, we are finally getting into combining like terms. When you combine like terms, you want to look at what's on which side of the equal sign, if you have something on the same side of the equal sign and they both have variables, like in this first example, you can put those together. So the 4n and the 4n, you add them just like you do any integer. So you just do 4 plus 4, and that gives you 8. And then you have to remember to put the n on. And that's equal to negative 24. And this is really the last step of the 3 previous equations, where we just need to get rid of our coefficient. So we just divide by our coefficient, and that tells us that n is equal to negative 3. Our next problem is a little bit more complicated. We have this fraction here, but we want to get this fraction right here. We want that to be the last thing that we deal with. So we want it to be the only thing on that side of the equation. In order to do that, we need to get rid of that plus 4. The opposite of adding 4 is going to be subtracting 4. So we're going to subtract 4 on both sides of the equation. And that will tell us that y plus 5 over 3 is equal to negative 16 minus 4 is negative 20. And in order to get rid of that fraction, we want to multiply by our denominator. So our denominator is the bottom of our fraction, which is 3. And when we do that, that'll cancel out. And whatever we do to the left-hand side, we also must do to the right. And negative 20 times 3 will be negative 60. And we just can't, and we just drop down what's on that left-hand side. From there, we want to know what y is, not what y plus 5 is. So we need to get rid of that plus 5 by doing the opposite. And we're left with y is equal to negative 65. If you struggle with your negative numbers, please don't hesitate to just put that into the calculator. That's why you have them. If you think you know, but you're not sure, at least just double check by plugging it in. And then our last example in the row is very similar to our first example in the row. You just have to be very careful when combining your like terms, because if you look, you'll notice that you have negative 8.3x and 5.3x, and this positive 6.3, notice that there's no x attached. That means that's not a like term. So you can combine your variables with your variables, but you can't combine your variables with your constants. So you can do negative 8.3x plus 5.3x, and that gives you 3x. But your 6.3 is just going to drop down. And then from there, it looks very similar to the previous problems. We're going to do our constant first. We want to get rid of it. So we're going to subtract 6.3 from both sides. And we're left with 3x is equal to 8.1. From there, we just divide by our coefficient. So our coefficient is 3. What you do to one side, you also must do to the other, and x is equal to 2.7. And then we're 2/3 of the way done. So we're almost there, just a couple more problems to do. In the very next problem, it's similar to the problem that we did up above, where we want to get that fraction by itself. So this fraction right here, we want that to be the only thing on the left-hand side of our equation. Before we can get rid of it, though, we want to combine our like terms. So we're going to take our 16 and our 31, and we're going to put those together. So 31 plus 16 is going to give us 47. And you still have plus m over 9 is equal to 74. And then in order to get rid of that 47, we're going to subtract from both sides so that we have our fraction by itself. On the left-hand side, that'll just leave m over 9. And on the right-hand side, 74 minus 47 is going to give us 27. And then in order to get rid of our fraction, just like up above, we just multiply by our denominator. So our denominator is 9, so we're going to multiply by 9. On the left-hand side, that will get rid of our fraction, and on the right-hand side, 27 times 9 is 243. And our next problem, we're once again being asked to combine like terms. So if we look at the left-hand side of our equal sign, we see that we have m and plus 2.5m. Those can be put together, and this 9.5, the minus 9.5 is just by itself. So remember, when you have a variable with no number, you can put a 1 in there. So 1 plus 2.5 is going to be 3.5m minus 9.5 is still equal to 11.5. And then we want to get rid of our constant. So we're going to add 9.5 on both sides. And we're left with 3.5m is equal to 11.5 plus 9.5, which is 21. And then our last step will be to do the division of our coefficient. So if our coefficient is 3.5, we're going to divide by 3.5 on both sides, and we will end up with an answer of m is equal to 6. And then we're almost done. We just have our last problem, which is taking us back to distributing. We have this number right outside of our parentheses, so we're going to multiply everything on the inside of the parentheses by that number. So 3 times x is just 3x, and 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. And that will still be equal to 7.5. Don't let the fraction confuse you. You're still going to get rid of the constant that you have on the same side of the variable. And then you can just do 7 plus 6, which is 13. Just remember to drop down that half. And then you divide by your coefficient. So your coefficient is 3, so you're going to divide both sides by 3. If you don't know how to divide 13.5 by 3, there's really 2 ways you can do it. The first is you can just go to Desmos, put in 13.5 and divide by 3. Or if all those fractions confuse you, 1/2 is a benchmark fraction, it's equal to 0.5. And you can do 13.5 divided by 3. It's the same thing. Either way, you'll get an answer of 4.5. For any of these problems, if you want to check your work at the end, you can plug them back into the original equation and you should get whatever it said it was equal to. So for example, the first problem, if you plugged in 7 to the original equation, and I would suggest plug it in inside of parentheses. If you were to plug it in just like that into your calculator, so just this left-hand side, then you should get negative 51. Same thing in the next one. If you were to take 1/3 parentheses 9 times 7 plus 12, and you were to plug that into your calculator, you should get 25.